We asked Poilievre's spokesperson about your party, and this is what he told us. He said, quote, "We are not paying much attention to what the former NDP leader says, and neither are Canadians."
Oh, beautiful.
Burn.
Last September, we reported on a new political party that aimed at an alleged gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives called Canada's Future Party. Well, they decided to join CBC to try to spread their message and win over Canadians.
Let's take a look.
The federal political party launched onto the scene today, over a year away from the next federal election and just over 1 month away from 2 by-elections. The Conservatives continue to maintain a double-digit lead over the governing Liberals, based on an average of the polls. The Canadian Future Party is pitching itself as a centrist alternative. The interim party leader says they are looking to fill a gap Canadians are looking for.
We've moved away from a policy and tone of moderation and keen judgment and civility. And when I speak with Canadians, they say they'd like to see more of that. So we do think that we are helping to fill a vacuum that exists.
Dominic Carty is the interim leader of the Canadian Future Party, and he joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
So give me the elevator pitch. What's the Canadian Future Party all about, and why are you launching this now?
We want Canada to go not left, not right, but forward. We think it's time for a politics that's focused on being brave, being evidence-based, and delivering results, because if democracy doesn't deliver, then people are going to lose faith in it. We're seeing that right now with the Liberals, who are trapped in the politics of the 1990s, and Mr. Poilievre, who perhaps is trapped in the politics of the 1930s. We want to talk about Canada moving ahead with clear, decisive plans for dealing with some of the big challenges that bluntly Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Trudeau are simply not being honest with Canadians about.
Okay. So this is Dominic Carty, everybody. And just some background on him. He has not exactly been what you would call a successful politician. So his first foray into politics, he was running for the NDP party.
Like as the leader, or just like in a riding?
A member of provincial parliament. So
Okay,
he was in New Brunswick.
All right.
And he couldn't win. And then he ended up accidentally becoming the NDP leader of the New Brunswick NDP party, just because the other guy was disqualified. And I'm not even joking. That's
Winner
what
by
happened,
default,
right?
yes.
And he couldn't even win his own riding. So then he got tired of losing. So then he decided to switch parties and run for the Conservatives. And then, wouldn't you know it, he won and then won again. But the problem is that when the New Brunswick Premier, Blaine Higgs, started speaking out against the gender ideology and the indoctrination going on in the schools, and introducing a policy saying, hey, maybe it's a good idea that the parents are informed if anything changes with regard to my child's preference of what they're calling themselves and what their gender might be. Hardy was one of the people in Higgs' caucus that kind of stabbed him in the back, spoke out against it, and then resigned as minister in protest, but then said, but you know, I still want to be a Conservative. So at that point, Higgs said, well, screw you, you're out. You're not just going to stab me in the back. And then so he ousted him from the party and caucus. So at that point, he was back to loser's row again. So then he decided, well, I'm going to start my own party.
Like, this whole situation is so ridiculous.
It's like, yeah.
It's like Bender. Fine, I'm going to go build my own party with blackjack.
Yeah, it is so ridiculous. And then for him to say that Pierre Poilievre, he just said this, Pierre Poilievre is stuck in the 1930s.
Say what?
What are you talking about? But, you know, they don't have the answers. He does. And we should just trust him because he says so.
Because he has such an illustrious political career.
Right.
national defense, immigration, housing, and so on.
Yeah, I want to get to Mr. Poilievre in a sec. Let's give you a chance to kind of spell out what you're all about. As you know, with the established party brands, people kind of have a vague idea of what they're going to get, right? With the Liberals, you're going to get socially progressive, a bigger government. The Conservatives, kind of anti-tax, tough on crime, smaller government. The Green Party, obviously quite self-explanatory. What are some of the key foundational principles of the Canadian Future Party? What is your brand?
So we line up with the 70% or so of Canadians who say they see themselves in the middle and have concerns about the slide of the Liberal and Conservative parties towards the extremes. So we're a party that is liberal on social questions and responsible when it comes to fiscal issues. Because if we don't have a government that delivers results, which means it has to be well run, people lose faith in it. And when people lose faith in their government, they look for alternatives. And I think one of the best ways to sum it up is, let's look at the immigration crisis. Mr. Trudeau's team created a political crisis by seizing political control of the temporary foreign workers and student visa programs. The other parts of the immigration system continue to work just fine. The crisis has come because the Liberals ignored the gatekeepers. So when Mr. Poilievre talks about getting rid of gatekeepers, we're talking about duplicating, triplicating, quadruplicating the sort of crisis we've seen in immigration. So we believe in expertise, but we believe that the experts have to show again that they can deliver. And we haven't done a good job in the political elite of doing that over the last number of years. So if we can't get back to a government that actually shows results for Canadian citizens, we're going to see that slide towards populism, which is exactly what Mr. Poilievre is taking advantage of.
I'm pretty sure that's not what Poilievre was talking about when he was discussing gatekeepers.
Completely not. Like, he wasn't even talking about immigration when he was talking about getting rid of the gatekeepers. What?
Is this guy doing it on purpose, or does he just not understand?
I don't know, but first he says, Poilievre and Trudeau aren't being honest. And then he goes on to start quoting a whole bunch of inaccurate information. So he's either inaccurate and uninformed, or he's being dishonest.
On purpose. Yeah.
Right. So just to be clear, when Poilievre was talking about getting rid of the gatekeepers, like you can all probably hear this in a speech. You've heard them so many times, getting rid of the gatekeepers and their bureaucracy in order to build more homes.
Well, and also to get our natural resources out of the ground and working for Canadians. I mean, right now in this country, it takes like 25 years to build a mine, like to start a mine. And, you know, if you can still do your environmental studies and do what you need to do and get it all done in, say, 5 years, why are we not doing that?
Now, what Pierre has said on immigration is that we need immigration. Yes, we do. Everyone should believe that we need immigration because our population is a net negative in Canada without it. However, what he has also said is the amount of immigration that we need in Canada right now should be tied to what we can accommodate in terms of homes and in terms of the programs that we actually use to support our people.
And speaking of programs, one of the programs Pierre wants to institute is a Blue Seal program where people who are doctors or nurses, etc., from other countries can bring their credentials to Canada in an easier, less bureaucratic manner. I mean, you've all heard the story of my nursing friend who studied in the States. She lived in Canada the whole time. She crossed the border every day to go to school, got her studying done in New York State, got her license in New York State, and it took her over 6 months to bring her license back to Canada to convert it to an Ontario nursing license.
And that's only because it was close. Right. So some of these programs Canada doesn't consider close. So some of these people, they say, no, you have to start from scratch and take the degree all over again from front to back.
Yep. And one of the most ridiculous things about her bringing her license back to Ontario was they made her do an English assessment, like to gauge how well she could speak English. It's the only language that she speaks.
This is the Canadian government, everybody. So anyway, this is quite the statements that he's already making. And what he's talking about is, socially progressive programs, but fiscal responsibility.
That doesn't really work, unfortunately. We would all love for it to work, but it doesn't really. You're going to have like one or two core programs.
And then that's it.
Yeah, and that's all you can afford. Sorry.
And they're not going to go very well. This is where, so there's so many things wrong with this. Let's just keep going.
But at the same time, there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable with his slide towards extremism and want to see a change from Mr. Trudeau. And we're there to offer a sensible, evidence-based solutions, a set of solutions that we hope will attract attention from Canadians, and we'll get to work on pushing that starting today.
So you're a former provincial Progressive Conservative. The party's interim president, Tara McPhail, says she's a former Conservative as well. You mentioned Poilievre, so is this movement that you're creating, that you're launching today, is it a direct backlash against kind of the right-wing, more populist style that Pierre Poilievre has adopted? You said it's from the 1930s. Maybe elaborate on that and maybe speak to what his role was really in the formation of this party.
It's not just Mr. Poilievre, and it's not just the Conservative Party. It's our politics writ large. The Liberal Party is falling into the same trap of falling into social media-driven, algorithm-driven extremism, appealing to people who are further and further away from the mainstream, further and further away from offering concrete solutions to real problems. So I don't want to hear any more apologies for things that Canada has done wrong in the past. I want to see solutions to what's wrong with Canada now. Mr. Poilievre spends his time talking about Canada being broken. Canada is a fantastic country. We're not broken. There's no end to what we can do. But we have people who've come to join the new party who are former members of Stephen Harper's cabinet, former members of Jack Layton's team, elected folks who are sitting in the House of Commons, former Liberal organizers, Greens, New Democrats, people from across the political spectrum who are all united in going, there's something seriously wrong with our politics. That this approach of just using social media and leaders' offices to run political parties, divorced from MPs being given any real power to express their opinions and vote the way they feel they should in the House of Commons, this is a problem that all the parties share, and it's one where, to use that example, we're proposing a concrete change. Canada copied the British parliamentary system when we built this country. One thing we didn't copy was the caucus system that allows backbench MPs in the UK to vote against their leaders if the leader's office can't convince them to support them. In Canada, we treat our MPs like sheep. They just vote yay, 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 nay, 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 depending on what the leader says. There's no reason we can't change that. That takes will from political party leaders, and that's what we're here to say we're going to do. And I have a record on this that 2018 to 20 in New Brunswick, when I was a cabinet minister, I helped write the platform in 2018. We ran the government that way. Through the early stage of COVID, creating an all-party committee, like a war cabinet, to help manage the province during that crisis. That's exactly the sort of creative approach we want to see brought to other crises facing Canada.
We asked Poilievre's spokesperson about your party, and this is what he told us. He said, quote, "We are not paying much attention to what the former NDP leader says, and neither are Canadians." So obviously he's referencing your past as NDP in New Brunswick. You were the leader of that party provincially. What do you say to them? It seems like they're quite dismissive of you and your effort.
Oh, beautiful.
Burn. Well, and this is the thing. Honestly, this guy, he just seems like an opportunist sellout politician.
Yeah, he does. I honestly, typically speaking, there's at least one individual I can think of who goes against this rule, but typically speaking, I don't trust it when politicians jump from party to party to party.
No, it obviously shows that, you know, you're obviously not really strong in your convictions when it comes to the type of policies all you're interested in is, how do I get into office?
Well, and I think it's different when the party changes around you. I mean, look at the Liberals, but for the most part, you don't go from being socially progressive or liberal to socially conservative.
Well, how do you go from NDP to conservative? Like, if you went from liberal to conservative, I still don't get it, but that's a closer move.
Yeah, it is.
Than NDP to conservative. Like,
that's the furthest move you can make, pretty much, or like conservative to green. But I just don't get it. Another thing that Cardi was saying was, he was talking about party discipline. Canada has very strong party discipline compared to other countries who use the Westminster parliamentary system. The reason for that is so that when you're voting for Conservative, or you're voting for NDP, or you're voting for Liberal, you know exactly how they're going to vote in the House based on their party constitution. For example, the carbon tax. You know that the Liberals are going to vote for the carbon tax, and you know that the Conservatives are going to vote against it. So when you're in the poll booth on election day and you're choosing whether you want to vote for somebody who's going to vote for or against the carbon tax, you know. And that's what party discipline does. It's more difficult if you have, for example, a potential candidate that you are voting for to be MP, and they could vote however they want on environmental policies, on fiscal policies, on immigration policies, etc. Party discipline is used so that Canadians know exactly how their MP is going to vote when they vote for that MP on election day.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons with every system, right? Because all Cardi is talking about is, it's terrible, it's terrible. Okay, so you've cited one specific example, but there's a lot of negatives to that because, to Tanya's point, you don't necessarily know how they might vote on certain issues. Now, it's down to a party-by-party basis, but what the current Conservative Party, does allow for is votes of conscience, when it comes to some of the more hot-button issues. But when you're talking about any type of vote that's a confidence vote, guess what? You got to vote with the party.
And there's different levels of voting, or different levels of whip, I think is the proper term that they call it. So if I'm not mistaken, a level 1 whip is where you can vote however you want as an MP. A level 2 whip is that the backbenchers can vote however they want, but the cabinet, the parliamentary secretaries, and the prime minister all vote in a particular manner. And a level 3 whip is when everybody has to vote exactly the same all the time. They typically only use level 3 whip for supplying confidence. However, they've been using it a lot more lately, probably because the Liberals want to stay in power.
Right, and they've included the NDP on that level 3 whip. So there you go. But again, this is a guy that he's a political opportunist. When you jump from the NDP to the Conservatives, and then you get kicked out, and then you say, well, I'm going to start my own party, and then I don't take you seriously, and it's obviously the case with Pierre and Trudeau. It's probably one of the only things they agree on is not to take this guy seriously.
What we have seen, which you've probably noticed over the last couple of weeks, Mr. Poilievre claiming that his party is the centrist party. Tory influencers online trying to pass that same message. They see the same polls we do. They know that there's a lot of Canadians, a majority of Canadians, who want to see a change, who are tired of Mr. Trudeau's over-promising and under-delivering. But at the same time are really concerned about Mr. Poilievre's drift towards populist extremism. So we're here to offer an alternative to that. And so, of course, they're going to say insulting things. One of the other things we're not going to do, get into that sort of gutter politics. We want to focus on what we're going to do differently. Sure, we'll be sharp when we have to be, but things like that are exactly why we need a change.
What even is populist extremism?
It's a boogeyman term that the left uses.
Yeah,
That's
because you hear these guys tossing around this word populism. None of them ever define it. The best definition that I could find is doing what's popular or what the majority of the population wants you to do.
You mean democracy?
Yeah, well, that's it. I'm like, what is bad about that? Unless there's something I'm totally missing, you guys can let me know in the comments. But I have not been successful in finding an adequate definition of this term.
Well, and here's the thing. Everyone remembers the Apple interview from Pierre.
On the topic, I mean, in terms of your sort of strategy currently, you're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean?
Well, appealing to people's more emotional levels, I would guess. I mean, certainly you tap very strong ideological language quite frequently.
Like what?
Left wing, this and that, right wing. I mean, it's that type of ideological spectrum.
I never really talk about left or right.
Anyways,
I don't really believe in that.
Okay, a lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Like which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but
like who?
I don't know who, but
well, you're the one who asked the question, so
yeah.
You must know somebody.
Okay, I'm sure there's some out there, but anyways, the point of this question is, I mean, why should Canadians trust you with their vote, given not just the sort of ideological inclination in terms of taking the page out of Donald Trump's book, but
What are you
also,
talking about? What page? What page? Can you give me a page? Give me the page. You keep saying
in terms of turning things quite dramatically, in terms of Trudeau and the left wing and all of this. I mean, you make quite a, it's quite a play that you make on it. So I'm
not
just
sure.
wondering.
I don't know what your question is.
Then forget that. Why should Canadians trust you with their vote?
Common sense.
The guy that was asking him these questions, he's like, what do you say? The experts are saying that you're drifting towards right-wing populism, and then Pierre takes a bite and he's like, what does that mean? Well, no, what does it mean? Well, that you're taking a page out of Trump's playbook. What page? Right? And again, you hear this all the time. The left uses these scary boogeyman words that nobody has defined because people have just made them up and started using them. So, and even the words that are properly defined, they don't use them correctly.
Right.
So it means something different to every single person. What Pierre's platform is, in a nutshell, is let the free market be the free market. Let capitalism do its thing. We should
Axe the tax.
Axe the tax. We should live in a meritocracy, meaning doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what gender you are. You should let your work speak for itself and be rewarded as such.
No more DEI.
And in terms of the environment, yeah, we should protect the environment. We should do our best to care for the environment. But there are ways to open mines, extract gas, and ship that to other countries in an environmentally friendly way.
Well, and Canadians don't need to suffer in order to protect the environment.
Right.
In fact, I think that if Canadians were not suffering, they would probably be more on board with protecting the environment.
Well, and the environment would be a lot better off in the cities, I can tell you that, because there'd be a lot less tents and a lot less garbage going around because you put so many people out of homes and into the streets.
Say populist extremism, but it seems to have an appeal, right? I mean, he's leading over the Liberals by 20 points in the polls. He's at 43 points, if we're to believe the aggregate.
And see, right here is why we hate the CBC. The CBC, whether he knew it or not, the anchor basically agreed with them that Pierre Poilievre is a populist extremist. He said, well, people obviously agree with that. Look at the polls. Non-biased, eh?
Populism is what's popular, right? That's the best definition I got.
Like non-biased?
All right. Ryan had to look up the definition of populism because it was driving us nuts. So
this is what Google says. Populism is a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups.
So awful.
So we shouldn't be listening to what the average Canadian wants in this country. Populism is bad.
Well, and this is when Cardi was talking about how, the MPs are sheep, they have to vote for what the leader wants. It's not what the leader wants. It's when these parties have their conventions, delegates can go and put forward their policies. If you check out the interview that we did with Derek Gladue from the NDG Westmount riding, he went and presented policy to the Conservative Party and they adopted it.
Right.
So, that policy doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from people in communities.
And if you're a member of the Conservative Party or the NDP Party or the Liberal Party, you can go to one of their conventions. You count as a delegate because you're a member of the party.
Right.
And you can bring a policy proposal forward. That's what these things are for.
I imagine there's some process behind it. You may need to get involved with your EDA, etc. I don't quite know all the details, but I do know that policy comes from the people and they bring it to the conventions and then it's voted on and adopted.
That's a huge lead. He's poised to form a massive majority government if an election were held today. So that seems to have a lot of appeal among people, right? You might quibble with his tone and tenor, but it's certainly resonating.
Well, first, I wouldn't quibble with it. I'd say it's extremely dangerous. And one of the things I think we've got to listen to is the voices around the world who've had their experiences with radical populist governments on the left and the right in recent years, is how dangerous they are, how they don't make life better for people. So putting that aside, absolutely he's doing well, because right now his party is the only one that's seen as an alternative to Mr. Trudeau. The NDP have hooked themselves possibly permanently to the Liberals. Certainly for the next election, they're going to be judged on the same criteria that Mr. Trudeau's team will be. The Greens, I think, have broadly succeeded to convince Canadians that climate change is real. Certainly that's not something we're going to waste time on in the Canadian Future Party. We believe climate change is real. And then you've got Mr. Bernier's party, who are just grumpy that they've been out right-wing extremists by Mr. Poilievre's team.
You mentioned the Green Party. As you know, in our first past the post system, it's really tough for smaller parties to actually win a seat. It took the Green Party 30 years from their foundation to when they actually won a seat with Elizabeth May. What makes the Canadian Future Party different? How can you actually win a seat in a system that really does not advantage upstart parties like yours?
First, that's absolutely the case. We recognize the challenge we're facing, and we're only embarking on this project. The people around me, who again come from all parties and none, who recognize the crisis Canada is facing. The reason why we're doing this is because we want to offer Canadians that alternative. And Canadians have a choice going into the next election about whether they like that or not. Our job is to present a positive, well thought out platform and a team of candidates who could manage Canada.
You mentioned candidates. You've named at least one for the upcoming federal by-election in Quebec in La Salle-Mard. You will name one in Manitoba as well. What does success look like? What are you expecting to see in those by-elections?
In those by-elections, we want to get our name out there and start to share our vision for Canadian politics. Longer term, our goal is to try and win as many seats as possible. I've never understood some folks in politics is how we're just here to try and influence the other guys. In my time in the NDP, that was often a problem. So we want to try and win, but what we really want to try and do is change Canadian politics. I don't care about party labels. If the Liberals or Tories take all of our platform ideas and start recruiting people who believe in those same sort of mainstream moderate values that most Canadians share, all power to them. If they don't, we're going to be there with a team, as new and fresh a party as we might be, to offer them that alternative, and we'll see whether or not that catches fire. That's up to Canadians to decide. That's democracy.
You know, I'm very disappointed with this CBC reporter.
You mean the fact that he's not challenging him at all?
Yes, 100%. Now, I know that there's different styles of interview. Even when you and I are conducting interviews, there's different styles. Some are a little bit more probing. Some are just kind of, tell me what you got. But this really seems like a sales pitch to me. I mean, he didn't even challenge Carty when Carty said that Pierre and the Conservatives were more extreme than the PPC. I mean, if you have your spectrum, right? You've got PPC, Conservatives, Liberals are supposed to be here near the center, and then it should be like NDP and Green somewhere around here. But right now, Liberals are all the way left with the NDP and the Green. So to say that they're more extreme than the PPC, I feel is inaccurate.
Well, and I find it funny that the only reason he spoke more about Pierre Poilievre than the Trudeau government is because Pierre's out front. And yeah, he's extreme. Like it or not, right now, the Conservative Party is in their home, and their home is center-right. That's where it is. They have a couple policies that are to the left of center, and a bunch of policies that are to the right of center. So, that's just where they are. And guess what Canada needs right now? It needs a center-right government.
It needs fiscal responsibility.
Right.
I mean, I'm going to be very interested to see what happens in these by-elections in September if these guys are running candidates. I wonder if it's just like they're going to get maybe 100 or so votes. It's like, I don't know who these guys are. I'm just going to throw them away my vote, I
think it would be funny if they ended up splitting the vote between the NDP and the Liberals. I think it'd be really, really funny. But nobody knows who these guys are, and I don't think anyone's going to take this guy seriously. He has no charisma at all.
No, he's got the same charisma as like a wet noodle.
as Chrystia Freeland, let's just be honest. And no one's going to take them seriously, because here's the problem with a party that sits right in the center. There's no like there's no real direction. There's no ambition. You're just going to be sitting in the center, and you're not really committed to doing one thing or the other. You're trying to say, well, we're progressive in some cases, and we're going to be fiscally responsible as well. Well, that's technically what the Liberals are supposed to be, and it's going to be what the Conservatives are. Like they're not going to be socially progressive, but they aren't going to be, bring us back to the Stone Age when it comes to some of these programs either. So this guy, you started your party at the wrong time, man. Like at the wrong time. The time to start the party would be after this election.
Oh, I was going to say 20 years ago.
Maybe. But anyway, so that's the Canada's Futures Party, folks. Look at them at the bottom of a polling stat sheet near you.